Coming up on Talking Points, Ukraine's president declares a day of unity for Wednesday amid fears of a Russian attack. We'll break down what U.S. officials are telling the public.
Plus, Canadian truckers continue to protest in Ottawa. Find out what action Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is taking.
And we'll have the latest on where New York State stands with its masking policies. Will the federal government roll back protocols as well? Talking Points starts right now. U.S. officials estimate that more than 100,000 Russian troops are on alert near the border with Ukraine. Welcome into Talking Points. I'm Chilekasi, Adele.
And I'm Teagan Brown. Intelligence officials now say an invasion could be imminent.
Talking Points analyst Moriah Humisten is with us now with the latest on the Ukraine-Russia border crisis. Moriah, we're learning today that a Russian invasion in Ukraine could happen before the end of the Olympics. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Teagan and Chilekasi, good evening. Now, last week on the show, we talked about the conversations the United States was having with Germany and France about the possible invasion into Ukraine. And now, as of over the weekend, the United States reported that it could be possible that there are invasions happening during the Olympics. And as of today, within the next 48 hours, now that an estimation of 130,000 troops are gathered at the border.
Mariah, what is President Biden saying at this hour, and how is the U.S. responding now that they are moving their embassy away from Kiev?
Now, the United States said over the weekend, Teagan, that they are going to act quickly and concisely if an invasion were to occur. Earlier this afternoon, President Biden had a phone call with Prime Minister Boris Johnson about what the countries would do if there is a possible invasion. And the call mainly focused on what European allies will do together with this invasion. Now, one of the main focuses they had was about Russian gas. And also, Antony Blinken, the United States Secretary of State, said that we are in the process of temporarily relocating our embassy operations in Ukraine from our embassy in Kiev due to the dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces. The embassy will remain engaged with the Ukrainian government, coordinating diplomatic engagement in Ukraine.
Now, even after the call with Prime Minister Boris Johnson today, the conversation about what the U.S. will do hasn't ended. What will happen if Russia decides to invade?
Yes, so Chilekasi, earlier today, Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the United States is ready if an invasion were to occur.
Thank you, Mariah. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is invoking the Emergencies Act in an attempt to end the trucker protests in Ottawa. Protesters are blockading the capital city, and we're also blocking the Ambassador Bridge. This is one of the major border crossings between Canada and the United States. A Canadian judge ordered police to clear the bridge so that it could reopen the traffic. Talking Points international analyst Ericka Love joins us to give us the details on the ongoing situation. Ericka, thank you. Can you break down what invoking the Emergency Act means for protesters?
Yes, so just today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has enacted this Emergency Act. Essentially, it is supposed to be an invoke on constitutional rights so that he can restore public order. Right now, we are unsure what's going to happen. Parliament still has to approve the order because it does infringe on possible constitutional rights. This is unlike Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. However, he is doing this to remove over 400 trucks that are currently in Ottawa right now. There were a series of arrests over the weekend there in Ottawa and over the Ambassador Bridge, which is close to the Detroit border. But this decision was made to limit all the issues happening in Ottawa.
So you talk about how it's unlike Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Can you talk to us a little bit on how this may contrast from the Prime Minister's typical viewpoints?
Yes, so in the past years, Prime Minister Trudeau has been very progressive with his decisions that he makes for Canada. However, this is more on the conservative side. This is going against public interest. About 46% of Canadians side with the truckers at the moment. Although 90% of truckers are vaccinated, about 10% are not, and so a lot of people have been siding with them. Doug Ford, who is the premier of Ottawa, has commented to those trying to force a political agenda through disruption, intimidation, and chaos. My message is this: your right to make a political statement does not outweigh the right of hundreds of thousands of workers to earn their living.
So we've seen these protests take place in Canada. Kind of want to know here, what ripple effects are these protests causing internationally?
There are quite a few ripple effects in other countries. There have been outcries from people in New Zealand, Australia, even Paris, France. Protesters have been popping up, siding with the people in Canada and the truckers. There's been some support from American conservative politicians, even including Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, voicing their support for the protesters, saying that it is their right, that they essentially have the right to protect themselves. And it's impacting so many different industries. Over $300 million worth of things are coming in between the border.
Talking Points international analyst Ericka Love, thank you. The Supreme Court allowing a congressional district map in Alabama to remain in place. This is overturning a ruling from a lower district court. Here to discuss the case of Merrill versus Milligan is Talking Points legal analyst Spencer Kweskin. Spencer.
Thanks, Chilekasi. In order to understand this case, we first need to look at the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Constitution and what they have to say. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. The act prohibited racial discrimination in voting. Under Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislator thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. Additionally, the 15th Amendment states, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, and the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. After the 2020 census, Alabama drew a new congressional district map, which put a sizable proportion of black voters into one district. Black people make up a fourth of the voting population in Alabama. It would only be the majority in one district. A 3-judge panel, with 2 Trump appointees and 1 Clinton appointee, found that the voting power of blacks would be diluted unconstitutionally, and told Alabama to redraw the map to give blacks 2 districts. But Alabama filed for an emergency injunction, and the Supreme Court agreed 5-4. When the Supreme Court normally hears cases, the previous lower court ruling stands while the case is being heard. However, when this emergency injunction was granted, the lower court decision was stayed. In this case, it allows the electoral map to remain in place for, at minimum, the upcoming midterms. Kavanaugh, writing a concurrence, stated that the federal district courts should not enjoin state laws in the period close to an election, and federal appellate courts like the Supreme Court should stay injunctions when lower courts contravene that principle. Now, the most interesting thing of note about this case is Roberts joining the 3 liberals in dissent. Now, Roberts has been historically against the Voting Rights Act, ruling against the 5th section in Shelby County v. Holder with a 5-4 decision. With a 5-4 decision in this case, this emergency ruling could spell bad news for the remainder of the Voting Rights Act and Democrats' future voting rights bills in Congress. Chile?
Spencer Kweskin, thank you. Coming up after the break, we'll have the latest on Capitol Hill as Congress avoids another shutdown. Stay with us.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
What are you, superheroes?
Just 4 brothers who hate bullies and love this city. Gear up, guys.
Welcome back to Talking Points. Congress is avoiding yet another government shutdown. The House passed a stopgap bill that now funds the government for a few more weeks. Congress has until March 11th to reach a budget agreement to avert a shutdown. Here to discuss the implications of this short-term funding bill solution is Talking Points congressional analyst Dominic Chiappone. Dominic, thank you for joining us. Now, what parts of the 2022 budget has Congress been locked in on?
Yeah, so a big theme of this congressional session has been constant divide over a series of issues. So starting off with some of the big ones here, defense spending has been a critical issue when it comes to allocating money. A lot of Republicans are in favor of dividing up defense, kind of boosting up defenses, while Democrats are more in favor of social and welfare programs. Abortion's also been a very, very hot topic. Republicans are in strong support of the Hyde Amendment, that is federal support to end abortions and not fund any abortion clinics, whereas Democrats are strongly in opposition to that. And overall, there's just been a general lack of compromise. But the key date to watch out for is March 11th. That is the new deadline set to pass a budget. That previous deadline was set for Friday.
Now, why did Congress choose to pass another short-term spending bill, the third one within the last 4 months?
So the simple answer is that government shutdowns are actually pretty rare. There's only been 2 this past decade alone. But there is a precedent, though, because in 2018/19, we did have our longest government shutdown lasting over 35 days. As a result of that, both sides of the aisle do not want to have a shutdown. Senator Schumer came out and said that this decision was responsible, and Senator McConnell said this was a common sense decision. So when you focus on those 2 things, it was imperative that Congress needed to pass some sort of spending bill.
Congressional analyst Dominic Chiappone, thank you. Dominic, new questions are arising after officials at the National Archives had to retrieve classified documents from former President Trump's estate at Mar-a-Lago. Also, the House committee investigating the January 6th insurrection found that there were gaps in phone records from the White House that day. Joining us now to break this all down is Talking Points congressional analyst Bond Demetri Photos. Bond, thank you for joining me. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Over the weekend, we learned that the National Archives were contacted. They requested the Justice Department to investigate former President Trump. What did President Trump not return to the agency?
So essentially, it was 2 forms of documents. The first one being really concerning Kim Jong-un, where when he went and visited the Hermit Kingdom, it was essentially what he was talking about with the president, dictator, if you would, of that kingdom. And also during the Hurricane Dorian incident, Sharpie Gate, where he redrew a map. Really, both of these events surrounding his presidency brought a lot of criticism and controversy, and it would make sense that he'd like to keep them close. However, because it did mean that they had to bring these records back. They are top secret and they're part of the government, and thus the current president has to keep an eye on these documents and not a former president.
And we're also learning now with the January 6th investigation committee, they're working alongside with Rudy Giuliani, who of course is President Trump's attorney and ally, to testify in front of the committee now that the committee is calling on Trump's friends who sat alongside him during the Capitol attack. What could that mean for the former president?
Well, taking these documents were definitely a ding against the president. With former allies working for the Democrats and Republicans' opinion, it would make sense that he's losing support, especially now as we're watching Giuliani working with Democrats and not fighting against them, especially as we're seeing McConnell working against Trump and trying to find party members who would support them, especially now that he's saying that people who worked against Trump, specifically people who are now being censored by the Republican committee, we're essentially seeing a falling apart of the Republican institution and essentially breaking up as we're running into these midterms. McConnell actually did say in a statement.
I do, but the issue is whether or not the RNC should be sort of singling out members of our party who may have different views from the majority. That's not the job of the RNC.
Bond, thank you. Syracuse Mayor Ben Walsh is asking for further assistance from the state of New York to address a multitude of problems in the city. Walsh spoke before the State Assembly's Fiscal Committee asking for their support. Here with more is Talking Points Syracuse analyst Tyler O'Neill. Tyler?
Thanks, Teagan. Mayor Walsh testified that even during the tough economic times the pandemic brought the city of Syracuse, the city was able to avoid a financial crisis. Walsh says the city has a surplus of money. However, the city does not generate enough money to cover its expenses. Walsh said that without determined fiscal discipline, continued economic growth, and the increased support of state government, Syracuse will be back in a state of crisis within a few years. I'm heartened, though, by our recent record of financial decision-making, growth, and state partnership. Walsh is asking for the state help in 5 key areas: violence, interruption, housing, transportation, and infrastructure and city finances. As for violent crime, Walsh says it increased last year by 3%. Walsh says he is seeking funds for an array of things to combat crime, including launching Syracuse's first mayor's office to reduce gun violence. Walsh is urging the state to fully fund state programs for quality affordable housing. Walsh's Resurgent Neighborhood Initiative will build 200 new affordable houses. Walsh said these affordable houses are being built at scattered sites all over the city. Instead of watching vacant lots or dilapidated empty homes dragged down a street, we're building new houses to lift up whole neighborhoods.
Now, Tyler, you mentioned AIM a little while ago. Why is AIM no longer sufficient to fund the city of Syracuse?
Right, so the budget for the city has grown by 19%, but AIM has gone down by 21%. So that amount there is just not enough to fund the city anymore. Walsh and the other New York State mayors are encouraging that they readjust how AIM is allocated to different cities, including maybe looking at the formula to make sure that cities are getting the appropriate money.
So despite the fact that right now the city is in a surplus, why will there be a deficit within the next few years?
Right, so the surplus only came about because of the pandemic. Walsh cut spending by 15%, and he even put on furloughs for state employees. Now that that is over, the funding does no longer matches the appropriate amount, and they didn't address the key issue here within the city is the structural deficit. The city no longer makes as much money as it spends, and that structural problem is the reason why the city of Syracuse is not making enough money.
Talking Points analyst Tyler O'Neill, thank you so much. Coming up on Talking Points, Governor Kathy Hochul dropped mask mandates for businesses and public indoor spaces. Find out after the break what is next for mask mandates for schools in New York State.
Hey, Hard, what's this? That's my resignation letter. You're resigning. Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you eat stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit. I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me. Okay, but remember, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors. Come on, that's it. Let's go.
Welcome back to Talking Points. New York State's indoor business mask mandate has expired. However, there are still places in the state where a mask is required. Talking Points New York State analyst Olivia Maniscalco has more on the state's guidance. Olivia.
Yeah, so on the topic of mask mandates, I have the list of masks where they're optional and where they're required. You can see that they're required in hotels, stores, stores, pharmacies, offices, and grocery stores. That's where they're optional. But then going into where they're still required, starting off with schools. Now, this was a big one for Governor Kathy Hochul because schools, they have a spring break in February, and she feels like they're going to be traveling, they're going to be getting COVID in other places, bringing it back, as well as children 5 to 11 are only 30% vaccinated, so she feels like, and 12 to 17-year-olds are only a little bit over 2/3, so she feels like it is not safe to get rid of the vaccine requirement in schools. Also, we have public transportation, state healthcare settings, nursing homes, correctional facilities, and homeless facilities. The mask mandate is still in place. Now, Hochul did say, the fight is not over, we're not surrendering, this is not disarmament, but again, the trends are very, very positive because with cases decreasing, she doesn't feel a need to have masks everywhere. But going into how people that live in Long Island and New York City feel about masks and other COVID-related policies, 65% of people feel like there should be a mask mandate, and 35% feel like there shouldn't be, just because they feel like the mask mandate will help protect other people along with themselves. 80% of people feel like the government has failed with testing, has not made testing readily available to everybody, / has made it too expensive. And 70% of those people believe that's the fault of the national government, and 30% of people feel like that's the fault of the state. And then going into the pandemic, 63% of people feel like the pandemic is going to continue for at least another year. And then going into New York COVID cases since the Omicron surge, the first case was reported December 2nd, and we had around 11,000 cases. As you can see, it quickly went up. The peak was at 90,000, and then today we had only 341 new cases, and that was yesterday. Back to you guys.
Olivia, thank you. Sticking with the topic of mask mandates, many other states nationwide have been relaxing mask mandates along with the state of New York. Talking Point's healthcare analyst Julianna Distante tells us more about the sudden change and guidelines in schools. So, Julianna, we've seen changes from a lot of states, Delaware, New Jersey, a lot of these states, more Democratic states. Why do we see so many more of these like blue type states lifting these mandates?
That's right, Chile. We're starting to see a large increase in these northeastern blue states, like you mentioned before, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut, all dropping their mask mandates, and now they're claiming this is because of dropping COVID cases, which is a large indicator that this is the right step. Now, when taking a look at Democrats and their relation to COVID-19, they're down in the polls, and with elections coming up, this is going to be something really important to follow. If Democrats want a chance, they're going to have to listen to the nation and see that there is a growing fatigue when it comes to mask wearing among Americans. Now, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy spoke on this at a briefing.
We're not, and we've said this many times here, we're not going to manage COVID to zero. We have to learn how to live with COVID as we move from a pandemic to the endemic phase of this virus.
Now, Julianna, these mandates are being lifted for businesses and indoor spaces. Where do school mask mandates stand currently nationwide?
School mask mandates are going to be very, very tricky. They're a different breed when it comes to these mask mandates. Now, the nation and the administration is kind of leaving it up to the states. States are going to have to take it district by district and constantly evaluating their COVID numbers and cases just to see if this is going to be okay for schools. There's growing protest across the nation, and as we talked about earlier in the show, in Canada, there's no secret that there is global fatigue when it comes to COVID-19. So how schools are going to react in terms of their mandates is going to be something really interesting, with increasing protest and public opinion is going to heavily influence these mandates.
And it's going to be interesting to see that as we approach the midterms as well. Julianna Distante, thank you. Coming up on Talking Points, it's been 4 years since 17 lives were taken in a shooting at a high school in Parkland, Florida. We remember the lives lost and discuss the changes that have been made nationwide since. Next, after the break.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. This is a serious problem, but one we can solve. Visit feedingamerica.org to help. Together we can solve hunger. Together we're feeding America.
Maybe he's really focused.
Maybe he likes spinning the wheels.
Maybe he just loves trucks.
Preoccupation with objects is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today.
OTN is on all your favorite apps: Apple TV, Fire TV, and Roku. Search Orange Television Network or OTN. OTN has its best shows, short films, and CitrusTV on demand. Family and friends can watch OTN too. Watch the live stream of OTN to catch live CitrusTV news, live from Studio B, and mornings on the Hill. On or off campus, watch OTN anywhere.
Welcome back to Talking Points. It has been 4 years to the day since a tragic high school shooting in Parkland, Florida. 14 students and 3 teachers were killed, while another 17 people were wounded in one of the most tragic school shootings in American history. Since this horrible afternoon at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, a lot has changed in American politics when talking about gun rights and gun control. So Teagan, this is something that's continued on past Parkland in terms of gunfire happening at schools. Let me break down some of those stats. 136 instances of gunfire on school grounds alone from August 1st of last year to December 31st of last year. In that, 26 people were killed, 96 wounded, and this is nationwide.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is something that even though it happened 4 years ago, it still continues to be talked about today. Although some of the groups that formed after this shooting have not been as active as they once were. March for Our Lives, of course, came out of this event with David Miles Hogg, Emma Gonzalez being at the lead of that and becoming activists and leaders. Now, even though that march was in 2018, it had thousands of people there. We haven't quite seen the same momentum that they had in the beginning. Now, they are fighting again for an end to gun violence, gun reform. President Biden, of course, said that they must do much more to combat gun violence and gun crime.
An interesting poll from 97% in Beacon Research. They polled 1,000 gun owners. 86% of gun owners said they support universal background checks, including 84% of Republicans and 80% of NRA members. So an interesting conversation is the American congressional system tries to move through on issues like this. But that's all the time we have for you today on this episode of Talking Points.
For more of the latest, be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CitrusTV News and like us on Facebook. I'm Teagan Brown.
And I'm Chilekasi Adele. Have a great night, Syracuse.